You want this, don't you, pig? Come on, come and take it from me. Come on! Ah!
Hey everyone, Andy here, and happy Halloween! Well, almost Halloween. Look, I really rushed to make this video in time before Halloween, and yeah, okay, I kinda missed the deadline. I'll be honest, I had no idea that I was even making this video until about 2 weeks ago. It was only after replaying a certain video game that I realized I had quite a bit to talk about, and it's a good subject for Halloween. So yeah, this video was very much a spur-of-the-moment thing. And, oh boy. It's been a while, hasn't it? Damn, I'm sorry everyone. I don't really know what happened. I kinda just ran into like a slump in terms of making videos, like a creative block. Class and work took more focus too, so I kinda just dropped my channel for a bit. I feel really bad for essentially leaving my channel on hiatus for this long of a time, so I really want to remedy that. So to those of you still sticking around, fuck, thank you so much. Again, I wish I could apologize more. Some of you guys have still stuck around for this long. There's nothing I can ask from you guys. You're that amazing. I really hope to get back into a video routine soon, but for now, I'll be perfectly honest, things are going to be a bit spotty. However, I will try and keep you guys more updated in the future, I promise. Anyways, enough about me. Let's get on with this video. Today we're looking at a first-person survival horror game, and I'm sure a lot of you still remember it. Condemned Criminal Origins. Developed by Monolith and released in 2005 for Xbox 360 and in 2006 for Microsoft Windows, it was a linear horror game with a dark and realistic atmosphere that a lot of new Xbox players got to experience. And man, we need to talk about that period in gaming, because 2005 was a fucking incredible year for horror games. Just to refresh your memory, that year alone had Resident Evil 4, Call of Cthulhu, Doom 3 Resurrection of Evil, The Suffering, and Monolith's other title, Fear. Damn, what a great year. And a good year for Monolith. It says a lot when two titles released by the same company in the same year both become all-time classics for their respective genres. Fear is very much an action game, focusing on gunplay and firefights. It was also developed for the PC, where it remains a hallmark of PC gaming to this day. Condemned, on the other hand, focuses entirely on survival horror, with a focus on melee combat and quiet atmospheric level design. It was a launch title for the Xbox 360 too, so mostly a console game as opposed to its PC sister game. I also find it kind of funny how a lot of people were introduced to the next generation of hardware through this terrifying fucking game. Still, what a good performance from Monolith. To explain the basic premise, Condemned is set across a dark, dingy, fictional city full of drugged-up criminals, sketchy characters, and insane serial killers. It's got a pretty interesting plot that I feel meanders near the end. Overall, it's got a good atmosphere, and I really want to talk about it, but I'll get into the plot more in just a sec. I've only really covered one other horror game on this channel, Metro 2033. However, even that game really needs to be called an action horror hybrid. Condemned is the first true, pure horror game that I've covered on this channel. Why is a little game like Condemned still scaring the shit out of me to this day? Well, we're gonna have to dive deep into this game and figure out why. So with that, let's talk plot. Alright, I honestly don't want to be dragged into a long-winded summary of this game's plot, so I'm gonna try and keep things brief here. I'll also give some spoiler warnings as I really want to talk about that ending, and I totally get if you guys don't want the ending spoiled for you. So if you don't want to hear anything about this game's plot and you just want to skip ahead, go for it. Here's a timestamp. Now, if you want to hear about the plot, but you kind of want to leave the ending a bit of a mystery, then I'll give you guys an out once I reach there. Don't worry. I'll be sure to not spoil anything that you guys don't want spoiled. Alright, you guys good? So Condemned revolves around the player's character, Ethan Thomas, an average dude working as an FBI agent in the fictional city of Metro. Huh, weird coincidence, I guess. Anyways, the story starts off with Thomas in a really seedy part of the city, investigating a crime scene by someone called the Matchmaker. It's apparently a serial killer who kills his victims, all women, and then poses them with disfigured male mannequins. Eventually, the cops figure out that someone else is inside the building with them, who they assume is a suspect. They split up, Thomas gives chase, loses his gun, and then has to fight his way through a few cracked up homeless dudes, and eventually gets captured by this mysterious person, who then subsequently kills Ethan's fellow agent and the officer, before tossing Ethan right out the window.
It shall come visiting again.
When Ethan wakes back up, he finds himself back in his apartment, tended to by a man named Malcolm Van Horn, a friend of Ethan's father. Malcolm reveals that the police are now after him, and if Thomas wants to solve this case, he's got to do it outside of the law. Personally, I wouldn't trust a creepy fucker like Malcolm. Like, just from hearing how this guy talks, my first instinct wouldn't be to trust him with my life. I'd probably be somewhat suspicious.
Ethan, you must trust me. I am here to help. Now go.
The story then meanders through a bit with Ethan venturing into the metro station, a metro tunnel, a department store, even a library. Throughout this story, Ethan slowly starts to unravel the mystery, finding out that this person he encountered was not in fact the matchmaker, rather a completely different serial killer altogether, Serial Killer X. Ooh. So the idea behind Serial Killer X is that he hunts down other serial killers. His MO is using other serial killers' MO on them instead. Huh, what a really neat premise. Like a serial killer for serial killers, a meta serial killer if you will. It's kind of a cool concept, and it further exemplifies Condemned's world. This city is on the brink of lunacy, and it's reached the point where serial killers are such a large demographic of the population that other serial killers are out hunting them as well. Ethan eventually figures out that Serial Killer X has been stalking him and keeping an eye on his career as well, tracking his cases and using them to pursue his own agenda, which seems to include tormenting Ethan as well. So finally, Thomas guesses that another case he's following, one about a serial killer called the Torturer, a guy who tortures people until they commit suicide, is likely Serial Killer X's next target. With a small lead, Thomas ventures off to find the Torturer and confront Serial Killer X once and for all. Anyways, I think that's the most I'll say without giving too much of the ending away, especially for those who want to experience it themselves. So for those who don't want to hear about the ending, skip to here, because I'm about to dive real deep into this game's few final levels. Okay, you guys gone? Alright, let's talk about that ending. So eventually, Ethan tracks down the Torturer, first at an abandoned school, then at an apple orchard outside of the city. He chases him around through an abandoned house and he finally finds him, dead and killed by Serial Killer X, who is revealed to be Leland Van Horn, Malcolm's nephew. Just before you can even hurt Leland, Malcolm comes out of nowhere and knocks you out with a shovel. Malcolm tries to negotiate with Leland, but Leland's having none of it, and knocks Malcolm out as well. When Ethan comes to, he finds himself tied up in a barn, with Leland taunting him as he talks about all the ways to kill him. During his speech up above the rafters, this creepy looking figure simply hangs there from behind. What is that? Is that like a ghost? Is that another person? Who is that? He's just kind of there, watching us, not really doing anything. Eventually, Leland has enough and chops off your finger, a bit like another horror game. However, right after that, his uncle jumps in and tackles him to the ground, subduing Leland and freeing Ethan, but also allowing this weird, creepy figure to escape. So the last level of the game has you tracking down this thing, whatever this is, with Malcolm saying that it's what's caused Leland to go mad. So you chase this thing called the Hate. That's what this mysterious person is called. Throughout the game, we've seen visions of this guy. Even from the very start of the game, he's been hanging around you this entire time. Apparently, he is what's causing the rise of insanity and crime throughout the city, including Leland. The end of the game is spent running through an apple orchard and killing a huge horde of bad guys. And these ghoul monster-looking dudes? okay. Finally, Ethan reaches a barn where this guy is waiting for him. After going through yet more waves of enemies, you engage in one-on-one combat with him. We go into a fucking spirit realm and fight him like it's Mortal Kombat. Okay, what is going on here? The game ends with Ethan defeating the Hate. Him and Malcolm are driving back to the city, and eventually Malcolm reveals that he kept Leland tied up in the trunk. After pulling over, Thomas then has the opportunity to kill Leland or spare him. It's a choice ending, but not really, because it doesn't matter. You can either shoot Leland, or Leland will pull out a gun out of his ass and shoot himself instead. Anyway, we then get another cutscene where Thomas is talking with Rosa, and she mentions that Leland may have been tied to a cult, but Ethan is a bit skeptical. She's wired, but lets him know, further letting Thomas know that he can trust her. It ends with Rosa leaving and Thomas heading to the bathroom with him staring at the mirror. Eventually, the lights start to flicker and a similar-looking figure appears behind him in shadow as Thomas begins vomiting. Finally, he spins around towards the camera, revealing his face to be identical to that of the Hate. Bum bum bum. Yeah, that's Condemned Story. What a weird way to end the game. I feel a lot of people had different interpretations of this ending, and I kinda want to give my own. At least what I thought was happening when I first played this game. Okay, so throughout the game, you constantly visions of this entity we know as the Hate. What's also interesting to note is that aside from some key moments, there's nothing really overtly supernatural in Condemned. Aside from a bit of stylization, everything feels very grounded and plausible. When Ethan gets a vision of a flashback, I thought that wasn't really him literally seeing back into the past. I thought he's just a good detective. He's simply replaying events back in his mind, how he thinks they occurred, like any good detective. But the Hate seems to exist outside of our reality. He appears in dreams, he can just disappear out of thin air, and he never really conforms to our laws of physics. And yet we're somehow supposed to believe that Thomas, a normal guy, can just kill him with a fire axe. Yeah, okay. So what's my interpretation? I always thought the ending for Condemned was almost entirely in Thomas's head. Like, yeah, he really did encounter Leland Van Horn. He did fight with him. He did get a hit on the head with a shovel, and he did get his finger chopped off. But did he really travel to the spirit realm and fight this demon-looking motherfucker? I don't think so. I like to think that the ending of this game is mostly metaphorical. Maybe Thomas is really going through these fields shooting at bad guys. Maybe he's just hallucinating and just burning down an abandoned farm for no reason. Or maybe he was simply imagining most of it, and in reality him and Malcolm are already in the car driving home. It's hard to say. But the Hate, at least how he's portrayed in this game, only seems to be just a representation of, well, literal hate. He is the hate that is causing the crime waves throughout the city. The literal hate that insane criminals and serial killers get consumed by. Early in this game, there's a cop who kind of ponders whether or not the criminals are on some kind of new drug. But I feel like the actual drug, the actual cause for everything, is simple animalistic hate. Leland was consumed by it, literally. He went out and horrifically killed serial killers and anyone who got in his way. And by the end of the game, Ethan is almost heading down that same path. The Hate is not a real person. He is merely a representation of the abstract feeling that everyone struggles with. Literal hate. I mean, it's his name. Malcolm even talks about how he himself resisted the hate, and that Thomas, while he can resist it, still has the hate inside of him, which we see literally at the end, with Thomas becoming the hate, the very thing he was facing against the entire game. The real ending, the one where Thomas really battled with the hate, isn't this big cinematic battle. Instead, it's the moment he pulls out a gun and decides whether or not to shoot Leland. This is Ethan really confronting the hate. At least, that's how I interpreted it. To me, this whole thing is just one big metaphor. All those visions and dreams Ethan had, just analogies to him succumbing to the same insanity that serial killers and criminals had succumbed to already. The hate is not real. Instead, he's only there as a physical embodiment of Thomas's, and for that matter, the entire city's hate and rage or what have you. Yeah, that's my interpretation of the ending. It fits within Condemned's themes and settings too. The entire game is about a city on the edge of complete insanity. So the idea that this hate is manifested into a physical being, something that's tangible, it's a pretty common trope. However, Monolith didn't seem to think so. I don't want to talk too much about the sequel, but to summarize, Condemned 2 basically retconned everything in Condemned 1. In Condemned 1, they will have throwaway lines that only exist to explain a plot element that didn't need to be explained. Like, Thomas has a dense bone structure. I didn't mention this earlier, but it's eventually revealed that in the first Condemned, Thomas has a really dense bone structure, more than most other people. And that's why he can take a few more hits. It's a bit of an unnecessary explanation for a game mechanic that gamers would universally have no problem accepting. Like, yeah, Thomas is much tougher than a normal human. That makes sense. It's kind of hilarious because Monolith did the exact same thing for Fear, having to explain why Point Man has slow-mo vision. We didn't need that. We'd already accept it, so that little tidbit was already unnecessary. But in 2, they had to go overboard and overly explain how he has dense bones, making his origin story all the more convoluted and dumb. They also needed to explain the hate. In the end of the last game, they mentioned that a cult might have had something to do with some of the murders, but I always thought that was just a throwaway line as to how Leland managed to do all this stuff by himself. He had to track down multiple serial killers single-handedly, so the idea that he maybe had some help from other people, maybe from a cult, kinda made sense. Either way, I thought by cult members, they were talking about real people. You know, an actual real cult. But no, in Condemned 2, they straight up retconned the hate. This dude was not a figment of our imagination. Instead, he was an actual person who was part of this weird secret society bent on destroying the city and possibly the world. Yeah, because that makes more sense. I don't like talking about Condemned 2. Where Condemned 1 felt somewhat plausible with just a bit of stretching of reality, Condemned 2 really feels like Resident Evil. It's gone full supernatural. So yeah, let's stop talking about Condemned sequel. It's a bit of a downer. So yeah, that's Condemned's plot. Overall, I'd say the story starts out strong, builds up really well, but then it kinda just drops off near the end. I'd say that maybe one more revision to the story, especially that ending, could have fixed the problems people have with this game's plot. Otherwise, I think it's good enough as is. It's a good little story, and a good little mystery that's still intriguing to this day. So let's get into the gameplay. Condemned is a pretty standard horror game. You move slow, you can sprint, but it's also pretty slow, plus you run out of stamina really fast. This game is mostly made up of linear corridors, so you won't really be dodging and weaving that much. On one hand, I feel like maybe Thomas, a guy working for the FBI, should be able to run more than a few meters without running out of breath. However, I do get why this was done. Condemned was designed around you walking and moving slowly, letting you get invested in the atmosphere of a level, as opposed to just blowing through it like an action game. Though I feel like they could have sped up Thomas's movement speed even just a little, because the occasional time that you backtrack through this game really feels tedious. But yeah, other than that, I think it's just a regular slow-paced horror game. I think it fits. The game will regularly break up levels with investigation sequences. These are moments where Thomas usually pulls out his phone, chats with Rosa for a bit about exposition, and then pulls out one of his many various Batman tools to scan a dead body or a piece of evidence just to help progress the plot. He's got so many devices that it kind of feels like you're no longer playing a horror game, but just like a crime scene investigation game, which is a cool premise in and of itself. I wouldn't mind that being expanded upon. Here, this stuff is only used for select moments, and it holds your hand the entire way through. But I'd kind of like the idea of a bit more open approach to investigation, letting you choose what equipment to use for varying pieces of evidence or crime scenes. I think Phasmophobia, while being kind of a different type of horror game, really nails the investigation stuff. In that game, you have to figure out everything on your own. I wouldn't mind a Condemned game that kind of follows that premise, so long as there aren't ghosts. Anyways, let's get into the meat of what people really remember from Condemned, and that is the combat. Alright, I need to talk about this combat, because it's kind of interesting. When it comes to melee combat, it takes a lot for me just to even enjoy it. Even modern games, melee combat can feel very tedious. On the outside, Condemned might just seem like a pretty standard survival horror game. The type of game where you just kind of walk through a level, coast through it, interact with objects, and you're done. In actuality, this game has a really nice focus on melee combat. The entire way this game handles combat is very simple. You got one weapon, and that weapon has varying stats on its damage, range, speed, or block. From there, you can swing, kick, or block, and as basic as that sounds, it's actually a saving grace for the game. It's simplistic, and that's kind of what makes it fun. You can pick up pretty much any weapon you want, from fire axes to sledgehammers to pipes, 2x4s, even fucking locker doors. If it isn't nailed down, you can pick it up and use it as a weapon. I'll also add that the animation during combat is really top notch. Their swings and attacks look very fluid and natural. Plus, when you bash them in the head with a fucking crowbar, you can really tell that it hurt. This is quality stuff. I've played through this game a couple of times, and I've always felt some sort of unpredictability with the combat, but in a good way. There's a bit of randomness as to how the enemies will behave or react when you're fighting them. They're able to feign their attacks. Sometimes they'll block you and immediately follow it up with a really devastating blow. You really have to watch out when you fight these guys. They also display some pretty interesting behavior, which kind of adds to their AI. For example, a lot of the time, instead of just bum rushing towards you like a boring, stiff zombie, they'll kind of wait for you to run around a corner. They'll hide and wait to ambush you. It's a little simple, but I mean, hey, it works. There's also neat moments where you can see that if they're unarmed, they will try to beeline it towards the best weapon that they can find, be it a pipe on the ground or that gun that you forgot to pick up. The point is, the enemies in this game aren't just mindless cannon fodder. Instead, they will wait for the right opportunity to try and kick the shit out of you. These guys are not pushovers, and that adds a whole new level to this game's scariness. When you enter a room, you are always on edge, knowing that there's a very real possibility that a cracked up hobo is hiding right around that corner over there. You can't see him, but you know he's probably there. Anyway, I've been talking about melee combat, and I kind of want to transition into the guns. When you can find them, that is. The game mostly revolves around melee weapons, but every now and then you'll run into a gun. If you pick up a gun, you're going to have to swap it with your melee weapon. You can only have one or the other, not both. And you can only use the bullets that are already in the magazine. You can't reload or collect ammo. Once you use up a mag, that's it. You gotta toss your gun away and swap it for something else. Now, this is a very interesting game decision. It definitely helps in making the player feel more vulnerable. What's important to note also is that these guns do a lot of damage. Often a single round will put a dude down. They're dangerous, and enemies, aside from a few exceptions, they aren't bullet sponges. This, combined with the scarcity of bullets in general, create this tension where whenever you have a gun, every single bullet you have is vital. Every shot you miss could have been used to quickly dispatch another enemy. So being slow and cautious and lining up all of your shots becomes key. All of a sudden it becomes this awesome game of chess where you need to reserve your bullets until absolutely necessary. All the while you're still trying to scan the room to see if there's a quick melee weapon that you know you'll have to use once your gun is all up. I think the guns are kind of a polarizing feature. I think overall it works in game design, even if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the logic of the game. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about Ethan. So this guy is an FBI agent who is clearly well trained with a firearm, given that he's given one at the start of the game. He clearly has experience, and I can't understand why he doesn't have the foresight or ability to simply grab magazines for guns and just hold on to them for later. No, instead he'll use up one gun, throw it away, and that's it. Like it's useless once you use up that one magazine. I mean, story-wise, I get why he doesn't have, say, a holster. I mean, the dude is on the run from the police. He probably forgot to put it on in his apartment. I mean, come on, he was rushed. He didn't have much time. So that I don't consider to be a plot hole. However, let's look at his character model. Yeah, that's a pretty large coat. I mean, if I were him, I would just stuff all the extra bullets I could find inside those coat pockets. Hell, I'd just stick my pistol behind my belt if I had nowhere else to store it. Because what if I stumbled upon, I don't know, a rifle or shotgun? Should I just throw my perfectly fine handgun away? Fuck no, you hold on to that, save it for later. Hey, that bag at his side looks like a good place for some extra magazines. You can fit all of this fucking detective equipment in there too. How about making some room for, I don't know, an easy to fit handgun? Or better yet, a health kit? Yeah, I see a bunch of these everywhere. Wouldn't hurt to grab a few. Sure, it's not as convenient as a proper holster or belt, but I mean, it beats having to drop your fucking gun every time you use up all the bullets. Yeah, because a piece of rebarb is a much better choice. I think Monolith could have done a better job at maybe giving us a reason why we couldn't hold on to at least a few magazines. Like maybe if Thomas was kind of a less experienced civilian or pedestrian, that would make some sense, like just kind of a regular dude. However, it's the fact that he's an FBI agent, you really start to question why he simply wouldn't hold on to a pistol that he absolutely has room to store. Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it a plot hole, just something that you're not really supposed to think about. As I said before, it works. The game is built around it too, so I think Monolith made a good decision in limiting the weapons in this game. It really highlights the difference between Condemned and Fear. While Fear is all about fast-paced action as you feel like an overpowered badass, Condemned is much more slower and more methodical, where you feel like you're barely holding on. It's a good dichotomy. Either way, nothing is more tedious than finding a gun full of bullets, even though you already have a gun with some bullets, and you have to decide just to drop one of them or for the other. And then when you use up your current gun, you think in your head, hey, that gun back there is still full of bullets, so you then have to backtrack all the way to that fucking locker or box or wherever you found that gun just to use it again. This is a strategy that you'll probably be doing for the harder difficulty, because you really can't waste ammo in this game. Every bullet is useful. And hey, it makes you wonder, why can't Thomas just pick one up with his other hand? Yeah, I don't know. Also, a little tangent, I don't really see that many mods for this game, but if there are any curious modders out there, I might have a request. I don't often ask things from you guys, but if any of you are listening, I feel like this wouldn't be that hard to implement. I want a mod for this game with unlimited ammo, just for fun. Yeah, I know it would break the game, I know that. However, the guns here are a lot of fun to use. I'm not kidding. You get shotguns, rifles, SMGs, pistols, revolvers. It's all good stuff. I'm just kind of curious to how this game would play as a kind of standard first-person shooter. I imagine that for those of you who are really terrified of this game, it could really become cathartic. So the guns are pretty good. The melee is intense but satisfying. What else can I say? Oh yeah, the taser. Okay, here's what you need to know about this dumb taser. It has unlimited ammo, runs only on a cooldown, a pretty short cooldown mind you, and you can use it whenever you want. For tougher enemies, it will stun them for a brief moment, although once you hit them and damage them, it immediately snaps them out of their stun. But for weaker enemies, it can literally kill them in one hit. Yeah, what? You've got this thing the entire game, and it really feels out of place. Like the rest of the weapons feel more refined and simple, and more balanced too. Everything feels very deliberate and it works. Weapons aren't too OP. They have their own strengths and weaknesses, and more importantly, you always need to swap out your weapon to adjust to the situation. Oftentimes, the game will encourage this by making you find a certain weapon just to progress through a level, and that item will just so happen to be a new weapon that you can use. Like, it'll make you grab a fire axe to break down a wooden door, or a crowbar to pry open metal doors, or even a shovel to sever conduits. That type of stuff. But with the taser, it's just this thing that you have, that you can use whenever, often to great effect. This shit can swing a fight, especially if you're doing really badly, which is why I wonder whether or not this was a last-minute attempt at balancing. Like maybe Monolith played the game and they thought it was too hard, so they gave the player this ability to stun nearly any enemy they wanted with no cost or repercussion. It's just weird, that's all I'm saying. It's weird. Like, if I'm being fully honest, I think a taser on its own would be a good weapon, like a primary weapon. It seems like something you would find in a level, it would have a certain number of charges to it, like a gun, maybe make it do some more damage, it could work as a rival to a pistol, maybe stunning enemies for you to perform a final move on them. It's just a thought. Everything else in Condemned feels so smooth and ironed out, at least for the combat, that the inclusion of this feels a bit out of place. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Lastly, another feature, and one that I just mentioned, the finishers. Okay, so on most enemies, if you do a certain amount of damage to them, right before they die, they will stop attacking and fall to their knees. The game lets you perform one of 4, or technically 5, finishing moves on them. These are fucking hilarious. What? You can punch them, headbutt them, grab their fucking head and slam it into the ground, or just snap their neck. Jesus Christ, what is the purpose of this? I always thought Ethan Thomas was just a normal guy caught in the wrong circumstances. As far as I thought, he had no ill will to kill anyone that wasn't in self-defense. But these fucking finishers, holy shit. I guess there's a lot more rage beneath the surface than Thomas is letting on. I said 5 finishers because I left out the easiest and simplest way to finish them off. Just hit them regularly. Or better yet, kick them. It's faster and it will kill them instantly. Finishers become even more ridiculous because a lot of the time, you aren't just fighting one guy, you're fighting multiple. So what happens is you end up in the middle of a late night brawl. You knock one dude to his knees, and as you're in the process of performing your WWE super move on him, his drugged up buddy is running towards you, trying to fight you off as well. You are doing this methodical, slow animation right in the middle of a chaotic slugfest. Doesn't seem worth it. However, kicking them is much more efficient. You can just kick enemies regularly, but it doesn't do that much damage. However, it's really good for weaker enemies, or enemies that are near death, like these guys. But nope, instead you can pick from an entire list of wrestler finishing moves. This is just so bizarre, and once again, feels like an inclusion that was meant to be expanded upon. I theorize that maybe it was abandoned by the end of development. So yeah, those are some of the oddities with the gameplay. Some inclusions that don't really feel that well thought out, and they probably could have been done better. Aside from that, the gameplay is actually pretty solid. It's a little slow, but for a horror game it works. It's a good example of when you strip combat down to its very core. Not being able to hoard weapons or ammo, or even health kits, means that you need to adapt to your environment. There is no prepping for a rainy day. There's already a hurricane outside, and your entire rainy day fun has been smashed and thrown out the window. Now it's all about surviving by any means necessary, and Condemned's game design really enforces that. It's brutal, it's tense, and more importantly, it's very simple. No crafting, no inventory management, no combos or movesets. Just you swinging away at a schizophrenic hobo as you both joust with metal pipes. The combat is visceral and feels dangerous. It's good stuff. To segue off of the combat and gameplay, I want to get into level design. I think overall these levels are a bit of a mixed bag. Some are pretty good, but overall I think the level design is okay. Has some good parts, has some bad parts, kind of just muddles together into a weird roller coaster. The level structure in this game consists of long linear corridors, with you meandering your way through a location, often multiple locations in just one level, meaning that a single individual level can have a whole variety of areas and little subsections to make it feel unique. For example, the second chapter in the game is the metro station. However, you start off in a back alley near your apartment, and you venture down near the tracks to enter through what I guess is a maintenance tunnel. It's all dark and grimy and gross. Then you eventually make your way into the station proper, transitioning into mundane looking office areas and eventually that big public area of the station itself, before you finally end up on the metro platform. These levels feel really long, and you'll feel like you've come a long way by the time you finish each one of them. And each level itself has its ups and downs. Each one definitely starts off really great. Some maintain their quality, while most seem to just dip. And then by the end of it, you just kind of want to move on to the next level. The basic structure of each level is also pretty much the same. As I said, this game likes to put you in meandering paths in linear corridors. Make no mistake, you are on a linear path the entire way through. Levels are very linear. Oh sure, the game may feel like it's opened up, but in reality the game knows where it's trying to move you through. It knows where it wants you to go, and you can't really venture off the path. It's kind of weird because the gameplay itself actually lends itself nicely to sort of open and unscripted huge areas. Levels that aren't quite linear and more open. But yeah, other than a few moments, the game is pretty linear. Even when you're backtracking through an area, you're kept on a linear path the entire way through. So yeah, aside from that, there also isn't that much mission variety. Outside of the level environments themselves, things kind of blur together. I'd say that the two most iconic levels from this game are the office building and the metro station at the beginning, only because they're the first two levels and those are the only two ones anyone remembers. There's a level where you're wandering through metro tunnels. We're not even going to talk about that fucking mannequin level. There's a level that feels a bit like an escort mission. Ew. The level in the school starts off really good, but it kind of loses its steam halfway through, and then becomes a bit tedious, especially by the end. Then we get to Appleseed Farm. This level. Oh my god, this level. It seems that among Condemned fans, this level in particular is remembered as the best level in the entire game, and definitely the franchise, if you even want to call it that. The chapter is entirely set within the confines of this big, spooky, abandoned house, but the game also does something completely new that it hasn't done throughout the entire game. It lets you just kind of explore to your heart's content. In this level, you need to find 4 different pieces of evidence just to progress, and each one can be located by this blacklight trail. Each trail leads you deep into a part of the house. The gimmick is that there are 4 of these trails that all split off throughout the house, so you have to decide which one you want to follow each time. This entire level is fantastic. It's creepy, it's atmospheric, and the fact that you're left to explore it all without any hand-holding just makes it all the more scarier. I think the fact that you aren't restricted to a corridor adds to the uncertainty of something popping out at you. You have no idea where an enemy could be hiding. No longer do you have to figure out whether or not an enemy's in front of you or behind you. Now they can be anywhere. This is awesome. You can explore the upstairs, you can go into the attic, you can venture through the living room, the kitchen, and then you can go down to the basement. Oh boy, that basement. Fucking hell, just thinking about going into this game's basement just makes me tense. It's fucking terrifying and an incredible level. Playing through this, I get a taste of what Condemned or its sequel or potential spiritual successor could have been. Something more open-ended, something that let you explore an entire abandoned building to your heart's content, without keeping you on a single track the entire way through. I dream of a Condemned sequel that takes this level design to the max and implements it throughout its entire campaign. But the game was never to be. This single level is probably the best the game has to offer. What a great way to spend Halloween. So this is the second to last level. So how's the final level? It's crap. Seriously, it is. You're given so much freedom during this penultimate level that the actual last level is such just a downer. It's disappointing. It's yet another narrow corridor you have to walk through despite you being outside on a farm. The game tries to force you down a hallway despite there being no hallways. Yeah, you could just probably hop over that fence over there, but the game doesn't seem to think so. You feel really restricted, and it's a lackluster way to end such a good game. So yeah, those are the levels in Condemned. I'd say overall, Condemned's levels are pretty good, but some have problems. But quite a few really hold up, especially that farmhouse level. That one gets a thumbs up from me. With that, I want to move on to another thing Condemned does really well, its visuals. Let's start with graphical fidelity. The first thing I should mention is that Condemned was a game made for the Xbox 360, with its PC release being more of an afterthought, and it definitely shows in a lot of respects. There are plenty of problems with the PC port, which I will get into in a bit. So let's start with the graphics themselves. The mid-2000s was a huge leap for engine technology. It's kind of incredible to see how the industry went from games that sort of looked like cartoons or abstract polygons to games that literally looked like real life. I don't think we'll ever see another leap as big as the one between the 6th and 7th generation ever again. Condemned is a testament to that. This game was a console game, and one of the first games for the 7th generation, period. It was an Xbox 360 flagship title, and yet the difference between its console counterpart and the PC version aren't really that different. So to preface this, the game runs on the Lithtech engine, which was the same engine to run Fear. Visually, these games share a lot of similarities, to the point where I'm almost 100% sure they share a good number of assets. Things like props and textures, you know some of this stuff is shared between them. Either way, there are still plenty of differences between these games, mostly stemming from the fact that Fear was a PC game and Condemned was a console game. Oftentimes, Condemned feels like Fear on medium or low graphic settings, if that makes sense. So how do the graphics hold up? I mean, it's an early 360 game. Compared to Fear, you can really see the limitations of the console hardware. Things like models and props, they have a really low polygon count. Textures are very blurry and kind of muddy. I don't know, everything looks a bit low res, which makes sense. It was a console game. Another downgrade compared to Fear is that the dynamic lighting seems to have really taken a step back here. I mean, it's there, but it's less dynamic than it was in Fear, and here it seems a little more static. There are a few moments in the game where the lighting is really shown off. Things like where a guy pulls a conduit out of the wall and the lights flicker on and off, or where a dangling lamp can cast some pretty cool looking shadows. However, aside from that, the lighting in this game isn't really that interactable. I can only imagine that having Fear level dynamic lighting on an Xbox 360 game would have essentially made the console explode. So I can understand from that perspective. There's another issue with the lighting in this game. Soft shadows. Condemned was an early adopter of the soft shadows feature that we see in a lot of modern games. All this does is it takes that hard straight edge of shadows that you normally see and adds a bit of a blur to it, kinda to just make the game feel a bit more realistic. Well, in Condemned, I don't think the devs quite nailed it. First, the effect itself looks kinda bad. I don't know, whenever I see these soft shadows, it just looks a bit glitchy. Like, you don't get a smooth gradient between light and dark areas. Instead, it's this choppy looking soft filter that tries to blend shadows and lit up areas, but just makes the game look a bit worse. I don't know, I think this feature just looks bad. The second reason is that soft shadows really seem to break the game, especially at the edges of your screen. Yeah, if soft shadows are enabled, then you will constantly get these bright spots popping up at the edges of your monitor. What I think is happening here is the area where the shadows and light meet, this fuzzy chunk of line right here. Something breaks when that soft shadow filter is turned on, blending the two together and causing it to glitch out and become visible through walls and geometry within the level. Like, this only happens right at the fringes of the screen, so I think it might be a glitch with the resolution, which means the game is rendering improperly. This also might just be a problem with widescreen resolutions, but you're playing this game in 2020, you're going to have this game running at widescreen. If you want to play Condemned in HD, then just turn off soft shadows. I don't really know why Monolith tried to implement a feature like this, because the default shadows look good. Look at this still holds up today. Anyway, I'm done nitpicking this game's visuals. Overall, the game looks pretty good. You'll occasionally run into a room lacking any nice lighting, but for the most part, Condemned holds up surprisingly well. Revisiting this game, there were a bunch of areas that blew my mind at how good they looked. Because aside from a few muddy looking areas, this game looks fantastic. Lighting and shadows are used to great effect to hide this game's age. You'll see expertly placed light sources that cast beautiful shadows, giving a normal room a whole new atmosphere. This stuff is straight up art, I'm not joking. These dark and dingy rooms always contain a light source placed in an interesting position to give the environment a unique and creepy feel. I think the thing that sells a lot of the environments is the amount of detail and clutter. While this stuff does look a bit low res, the amount of little details and props and objects added throughout a room or hallway really sells you the idea that you aren't just walking through a square-shaped corridor. You really feel like you're tiptoeing through a dilapidated building. You'll see a bunch of little objects and clutter lying on the ground. You'll see huge cracks and holes in walls, letting you see into neighboring rooms. It just holds up. I don't have much else to say about the graphics aside from they're great. Like, seriously, if you updated the textures and models, these levels would hold up in modern games. I'm not kidding. I know people today laud the achievements of modern lighting engines. Things like ray tracing is being talked about more. But goddamn, I will always love the artistically placed shadows of the 7th generation. I can't get enough of this stuff. Condemned looks incredible, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a timeless looking game. One other thing I want to talk about has to be Condemned's sound design. Let's start off with the music. It's pretty good. Most of Condemned's soundtrack consists of just horror ambience. You know what I'm talking about. Creepy sounding tracks that sound less like music and more like static machinery buzzing or humming away. It does its job well, making environments and levels a bit more creepy. However, there are a couple tracks that actually have some proper music to them. Some are kind of generic, but I really like the main menu theme. I don't know, I just like how it goes for a sort of crime thriller vibe, emphasizing that the story is about detectives and cops and a mystery that needs solving. Not the typical theme you'd expect for a horror game. And I like it. It definitely pushes the idea that this isn't a run-of-the-mill horror game like Resident Evil or Doom. It's dry, it's mundane, it's another day on the job of being a cop. Nice. Outside of that, I wouldn't really call the music noteworthy. It does its job, and that's about it. The funniest thing is that when writing this video, I could not for the life of me recall any music from this game, aside from the main menu music. And that's probably because it's one of the few pieces of music that actually has a melody, as opposed to just weird white noise. And it plays whenever you open the main menu. So yeah, you're going to hear this piece a lot, and you're going to remember it. As for the rest of the sound, voice acting is really good. A lot of people seem to think that Thomas is a boring character, but I actually kind of like him. He sounds like a normal person. He's not over the top, he's not moody or angsty. He's the right person for this game. You can tell he has experience with serial killers, and the way he talks about them is very matter-of-fact and to the point. I like that. He's easy to project into, and he feels like a regular dude. That's all I can ask for. The rest of the voice acting is also pretty good. Characters sound like real people, and maybe Malcolm is a bit too eccentric. Still, aside from that, everyone does a pretty good job. I even like how some side characters, or even some of the nameless thugs, really have some personality to them.
Hey, Pig! I know you're down here!
Federal agent, come out peacefully or I will use force.
Fuck you!
Outside of voice acting, the sound effects are really good. Things from the impact of a pipe hitting a guy in the head to the sound of props and objects falling over are all pretty well done. Hell, something as simple and innocuous as your footsteps have a lot of detail put into them. You can hear the difference between rotting old wooden floorboards creaking beneath your feet versus dirty concrete as you crunch through pieces of broken glass. Kudos to the sound department because god damn, the sound effects in this game are top notch. When they work. Okay, damn it. I wanted to get through this section without having to nitpick anything. Honestly, I just wanted to gush about the sound design. But no, looks like there's yet another thing I gotta complain about. Remember when I said that Condemned's PC port was kind of broken? Well, one huge problem is that they messed up the sound when they tried to port it over, meaning that some sound effects are just straight up missing. There's one infamous moment where this really gets shown, and it's the train sequence. It's the scripted, on-rails, literally, section where you ride a subway through a metro tunnel, serving as a transition between two different levels. The problem is that when any unsuspecting player reaches this part on PC, they get literally no sound.
I don't hear any train sounds, by the way. What is going on?
No, this isn't how that section was supposed to sound. This is what it should sound like. Yeah, listen to all that. All those sound effects, all those layers. It sounds great. But only if you've patched the game. When you play the game unpatched, it's kind of a downer when you reach sections like these. I remember getting to this part on my first playthrough, and I want to say I almost gave up. It was just annoying, and it broke the atmosphere immediately. All these missing sound effects, I just kind of lost interest. Luckily, since then, fan mods and patches have restored Condemned to its console counterpart. I'll get into them in a bit. Anyways, enough about glitches and nitpicks, because the sound design in Condemned is incredible. I'm mainly talking about ambiance. It's fucking amazing in Condemned. I've never really noticed it on my first playthrough, but playing through it again, oh boy. I think the reason why this game doesn't have a lot of music is just so the ambient noise has a chance to shine. Condemned builds up a really creepy atmosphere just by giving you plenty of moments without combat or jump scares, just letting you quietly walk through a room or a hallway while you get to listen to the magnificence of the ambient sound design. Things like creaking floorboards, humming of fluorescent lights, your footsteps crackling over glass, it's just amazing. The ambience changes between levels too. So each one has such a unique presence. Definitely a case where the level designer and sound designer were on the same page. I think a huge part of it has to do with the game always keeping you on your toes. Sometimes you hear a banging sound. Is that a bad guy, or is it just the wind? And more often than not, it's just the building creaking and settling, not some 2x4 wielding maniac charging at you from behind. This is also another good part about sound design. Often with horror games, the reveal of an enemy, almost always with a jump scare, is immediately followed by intense orchestral score, a huge stinger, and yeah, the game starts to feel like a movie. You know what I'm talking about. Sort of super intense music that goes like bumpa, 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 bumpa. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. But in Condemned, the lack of a traditional soundtrack doesn't let that happen, especially when you encounter bad guys. A lesser modern horror game, Outlast, would have a big dramatic cinematic moment where a bad guy jumps out from around a corner and gives you ample opportunity to escape. Throws you on a roller coaster ride, you're running, you're jumping over objects, he's chasing after you, the music is building. Oh man, what an intense ride. Haha, that was fun. However, Condemned's game design doesn't lend itself to these quick time events and scripted roller coaster rides. When Condemned throws a dude at you, it's quiet, understated, and because of that, really fucking creepy. I guess I'm now starting to stray away from just sound design, so let's talk about the presentation, because everything about Condemned's presentation is top tier. Graphics and sound design hold up really well, but it's just this game's atmosphere that really keeps it timeless. For me, a horror game relies entirely on its setting and environment, almost to a fault. A game can straight up be ruined by a bad or uninteresting locations, even if it's a really good horror game. For example, I've heard that Evil Within 2 is a really good horror game, but the environments in that game just don't have that interesting flair to them that a game like Condemned has. I'm just not a fan of dreamscapes or fake realities and that type of stuff. It does kind of tie in with my taste with horror, but I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a minute. Some other examples, Blair Witch, which was a pretty bad horror game on its own. Oh sure, the woods can be scary. I think a hyper-realistic looking forest in a video game could be awesome. But this game's art direction just kind of made the screen seem so muddy and gross. You never really felt like you were actually in the forest. I think another game, Darkwood, was a great example of how to make the woods scary. Sure, it's far more stylized and weird, but it has such a rich atmosphere. You really feel terrified huddled up inside a cabin as something tries to break its way inside. I wouldn't say there's an exact rule to what kind of environments I'm attracted to. It's mostly just a case-by-case thing. When you try to make the graphics way too invasive, things like adding color filters and gross muddy vision to the screen, you know what I'm talking about. I don't know, I start to really hate my environment. On the flip side, even mediocre horror games, so long as they have a really cool looking environment, I'm way more forgiving for them. All it takes is a really good atmosphere and I'm hooked. Condemned is one such example, having really good levels and environments and just a really neat aesthetic in general. All of Condemned's levels take place in abandoned, decrepit buildings, places that need to be condemned. For the most part, this game kind of lacks any weird over-the-top environments, aside from a few crime scenes and more notably that weird janky ending. Other than that, everything feels very grounded and realistic in terms of environments. You've got closed down metro stations, empty schools, and even an old abandoned house. Awesome. And that's kind of one thing I've noticed about Condemned and its presentation. It's very uncinematic. Oh sure, the game takes a lot of cinematic influences. The story itself feels ripped off from a bunch of horror movies and crime thriller movies. I also get a lot of Seven vibes from this game, and I'd be shocked if the developers didn't take inspiration from it. But the way you meander through these environments and scares, it feels very unscripted and unmovie-like, which in a way makes it all the more scarier. It's so quiet and subdued that the jump scares, when they do happen, really hit home. Because they're not telegraphed to you, they happen naturally, which just makes the game all the more scary. Anyway, I guess we've already kind of transitioned into horror, which I have a lot to say for Condemned. So with that, let's talk about what I love about Condemned's horror. The big reason why I love Condemned, despite it being such an old game, has to be its underscored approach to horror. I could ramble about Condemned's horror for hours, but I think I'll keep things a bit brief in this video, especially considering that when it comes to talking about the artistic merits of horror and stuff, I'm not really the guy to be doing it, if that makes sense. I just kind of want to talk about what really stands out to me when I play this game, in terms of what scares me. Now, for whatever reason, people seem to remember this game as that crazy jump scare flashlight game from 2005. For all intents and purposes, this game looks like it would belong in the same camp as modern jump scare flashlight simulators. You know the ones I'm talking about. Those games whipped up in Unreal Engine where some terribly animated monster pops out and scares you, and then some Twitch dude screams into his face cam for an hour. But upon closer inspection, the horror in Condemned is utilized much better in the hands of Monolith. So what makes this game a lot scarier than others? Well, after playing through it again, I think I've come up with a couple reasons why. First, one huge reason is that while the game likes to incorporate the occasional fantastical element, it kind of keeps itself pretty well grounded in real life. That is, real life stakes and real life consequences. Sure, it is a bit stylized, almost a bit comic booky, if that makes sense. However, it never really breaks your immersion. I have a hard time getting immersed in modern horror games, usually thanks to a heavy-handed approach to the horror. I kind of feel this way about movies too. When doing something scary, people these days think they need to go crazy and over the top. Simplicity is left at the door, and they just go overboard. For example, I see games like Until Dawn, and I genuinely don't get that scared. I feel its overly cinematic approach to the entire game is what really ruins it for me. Makes it feel like one of those bad Blumhouse horror movies that they throw into a theater every once in a while. Condemned, however, it knows how to keep itself scary the entire way through. Simple things like seeing a shadow around a corner, hearing footsteps patter by in another room, or just simply refraining from adding in any overly scripted QTE moments, just letting the player experience this stuff on our own. The scares in Condemned feel very natural and quiet, and the fact that most of them are unscripted adds just another level of unpredictability. The second thing about this game's horror is that Condemned is a really good example of real physical horror, for the most part. I talked a bit about the ending earlier, and while I do enjoy the story on its own, I think the best stuff in this game is the stuff that feels real, and not like some weird dream sequence. I like my horror physical and real. I get that some people like weird psychological horror, you know the kind, the ones that keep you guessing, is it real or not? Is it all in the main character's head? Is it a dream? Oh my gosh, how twisty. No, I like my horror tangible. There is no doubt as to whether or not the thing is real. That is a real fucking alien killing people, and if it gets off of Antarctica, it may very well infect the entire population of Earth. Michael Myers is a real dude, and he's actually killing people. The xenomorph in Aliens is not a figment of the crew's imagination. It's real, it's there, and it's killing people. These are real threats that need to be stopped. I'm not even really talking about suspension of disbelief. I'm more just referring to how my caveman brain needs to know that a threat is real before I can properly feel scared. Things like reality-bending horror really doesn't do a thing for me. Works for other genres, but not for horror. It just isn't scary anymore. I just need a tangible reason why I'm scared, and Condemned delivers. Sure, it occasionally throws a trippy sequence at you, but for the most part, the threat here is physical, tangible, and real. These are real drugged up criminals, and none of this is in my head. They want to kill me. They will go through any means to do so. I'm sold. My brain understands the threat, and I understand what's at stake, so it's scary. I will say, to kind of go off on a funny little tangent, whenever I play Condemned, I'm constantly reminded of those abandoned building exploration channels that seem to be popping up all over the place. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Those videos where a bunch of guys sneak into a condemned house or school or a fucking mental asylum. My favorite subgenre within that genre are the videos where they find a cracked up homeless dude that chases them out. That's quality content right there. So when I play Condemned, my brain never really gets that it's fake alarm that a lot of other horror games have. Often, games try a little too hard to be cinematic, and as a result, their scary moments tend to fall flat. I feel like the misguided path of developers trying to make their games more cinematic have only resulted in more narrow, linear games where the scares are mostly scripted, and as a result, they feel really disingenuous. In a haunted house theme park ride, you know that the monsters aren't real. You know that every little jump scare is thoroughly planned out ahead of time. Now, there isn't anything necessarily wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I actually like quite a few games that have that type of game design. I love Dead Space games, as polarizing as some of them are, and they follow this design philosophy to a key. Over-the-top scares, QTEs, tight scripted sections. This is a video game representation of that horror theme park ride. But I wouldn't necessarily call Dead Space a genuinely scary game. It has scary moments. It can have a pretty good horror atmosphere. I'm not arguing that. But for the most part, I would actually call it just kind of an exhausting game. Because by the time you beat the game, you really feel exhausted. Super intense moments where you're running from a monster and the music's beating, and it just tries a little too hard. You feel tired. However, Condemned feels more grounded and loose with its scares. It feels like you're one of those dudes exploring an abandoned building. Sometimes you might hear a noise, but that might just be the wind. Sometimes you may just walk through an area without encountering another person. All it takes is for that one moment where you find out that the noise you heard was in fact a dude hiding down a hallway in front of you, and now all bets are off. It's really unpredictable. I feel the horror in Condemned, while not quite having the production value or shock factor as a lot of other games, it really works well because of how simple it is. Its uncinematic nature is what really keeps you on edge the entire way through, and it's why whenever I think about replaying Condemned, I get filled with dread, but the good kind of dread. This might be one of the few horror games that still manages to scare me on repeated playthroughs. It's that good. Alright, so that was a lot of flowery talk on how Condemned is this artistic masterpiece, but a lot of you are wondering, how am I going to get this game up and running in 2020? And I feel ya. So let's get down to basics. First, you'll notice that when launching this game right after you download it from Steam, you'll get a black screen. Yeah, this isn't supposed to happen. The game will pretend that it's loading, but it isn't. You'll be stuck here forever. This seems to be just a compatibility problem with Windows, and the fix is laughably easy. Just head over to the directory, find your .exe, right-click and click on Properties, head over to the Compatibility tab, and check this box to disable full screen optimizations. Boom, the game should work. But you don't want to stop there. As I mentioned earlier, Condemned has quite a bit of compatibility issues, as well as glitches left in the PC port that Monolith never decided to patch. One huge problem with the PC port is the missing sound effects. However, another, probably larger problem is the one that causes your FPS to drop. I'm talking about a slow, stuttering frame rate. Oftentimes when you initially launch the game, it'll seem to run smoothly, no issues for a few moments, until the game itself gives up and starts chugging away like you're trying to run fucking Crysis or something. Any low-end toaster should be able to run these games at perfect 60, yet my 2080 seems to be having some trouble. This isn't the fault of your GPU though. Now, this is the result of a 15-year-old engine having trouble running on modern hardware. From what I'm told, this happens when you have HID-compliant devices connected to your computer, either from a keyboard, mouse, or joystick. Yeah, whenever you have these enabled, games like Condemned and Fear will go crazy, and they'll run at single-digit frames. Yeah, this is hard-coded into the Lithtech engine. Now, when I first played Fear, I think I literally had to go in and disable all of these HID devices one at a time, just to get the game running at a reasonable frame rate. But that's tedious and too much work. Luckily, since then, many modders have developed fixes for this problem, both for Fear and for Condemned. In this case, I've used a fix made by a guy called 13AG. He released a pack for the game that, on top of having widescreen support, fixed the frame rate and even fixed the sound. Although I haven't extensively tested the sound in this game versus its console counterpart, so maybe take my word with a grain of salt. Still, this mod pack is a requirement just to play this game. It just fixes the game. What else can I say? Also, if you're wondering how I increased my FOV, that's just a simple command that you can put in the game's autoconfig file. Just one line and you're done. So that's Condemned. What a neat little horror game. This game might not have the cultural relevance of other games that came out at the time. However, Condemned somehow manages to maintain a following, even 15 years later. It honestly seems that every year people keep on discovering this game, either to revisit it or to experience it for the first time. I constantly see new Let's Plays for it, year after year, new streamers checking it out, with plenty of new viewers getting exposed to it every Halloween. Fuck, somebody made a 2 million view video about this game just a couple years ago. That's a lot of people interested in a 15-year-old game. Now, why is that? Well, I think it's ultimately due to the game's approachability. Its simplicity is what allows countless new players to try it out and get the shit scared out of them. And honestly, I feel like it'll continue to do so for more years to come. this game is 15 years old and it still holds up. Art direction and lighting look great, controls feel smooth and responsive, the game's story, while a little convoluted, is easy to get into. Plus, the scares in this game are awesome. There are many other games that came out after Condemned that share the same formula. Linear corridors and hallways as a player with just a flashlight meanders through them like a haunted house theme park ride. The difference with Condemned is that it builds up the scares and atmosphere in a much more classier and professional way. It's hard to describe, but this game just nails its horror, where other amateur games really don't. It's much more subdued and grounded, while other games seem to try way too hard and everything becomes a little too over the top. The bad guys need to be insane-looking monsters and overly designed ghosts. Their setting needs to be trippy and crazy and out of this world. Their characters need to pretend they're on a soap opera. But with Condemned, it just feels a bit like a crime thriller. Everything is dry, feels genuine, and it makes the game kind of scarier in a way. You never really need to suspend your disbelief. The fact that most of the horror in this game has no supernatural element or undertone is what really makes the scares feel genuine. But as we all know, Condemned had a sequel. So, will I ever be looking at that game on this channel? No, I won't. It only came out for consoles, and literally every review I've seen about that game says it's terrible. I have no desire in trying to hunt down a copy of a sequel game that ruined what I loved about the original. So I think I'll stay far, far away from that one. I'm a little confused as to what happened to Monolith during the mid-2000s. Like, for 1 year, in 2005, they made 2 of the best horror games ever made. But then, when they tried to make follow-ups, they failed spectacularly. They were also made by Monolith. They weren't outsourced to anyone else, not like Fear 3, so who knows what the fuck happened. Maybe Monolith's success was just a fluke. Like, at that particular sliver in time, in 2005, they just so happened to have the right staff working on them. It's kind of sad, in a hilarious way actually, because whenever I play through Condemned, I constantly think to myself, gosh, I want a sequel to this game. Only then for me to remember, oh yeah, they made a sequel. And then I think again, gosh, I want a real sequel to this game. I'd say Condemned as a game on its own holds up tremendously well. It still scares me to this very day, and that's a testament to how well it was designed. I'd recommend this game to just about anyone who likes horror and maybe FPS games, although I wouldn't necessarily call Condemned a true FPS, more like a first-person brawler with moments of shooting. I'd say that if you're on the fence, you should definitely check it out. A good 5 or 6 hour campaign that is really good to play on a chilly fall weekend. I am a bit stumped at the price, however. $15 for a 15-year-old little horror game? For context, Fear is $10, and yet that game comes with 2 expansion packs, even if one of them is shit. But Condemned on its own doesn't really have that much additional content outside the linear single player. I'd say that if you're super intent on playing this game, there's no better time to get it than now. But otherwise, if you see it on sale, pick it up. You will not regret it. Condemned is a quality game that belongs in everyone's collection. A good spooky game that I'm really glad I revisited, even if it scared the shit out of me. So yeah, that's the game. And that's the video. Again, I'm sorry for being on such a long hiatus, just a creative block that I was going through. This game really woke me up and made me rush to make a video before the month was over. So hopefully I can now get back into a more standard schedule. I hope to make some more videos by the end of the year, some more games, some more obscure games too. But in the meantime, stick around. I hope you enjoy things and have a happy Halloween.
Happy